The morning in the village always begins early. Valentina Semyonovna woke up at dawn. I took the chickens for a walk, fed the few rabbits that remained, and swept the yard a little. Sadly, the old barn, which was already falling apart, with the roof full of leaks, and the small house that had been abandoned, were also in pretty bad shape. The fence was crooked, and I sighed with sadness. The neighbor's cat, Carrot Top, was already around, rubbing against his owner's legs, asking for breakfast. She petted him lovingly and served him some milk in his bowl. Then it was Suja's turn. The woman served her the soup and water that had been left over from yesterday and scratched behind her ear. The old blind dog had been loyal to this house her whole life and adored her owner. Feeling the warmth of her hand, she wagged her tail, jumping with happiness. The woman began to speak to her, as she did every morning. "Just Suja, you and I are the only ones left alive. There's no one else. The teacher has been lying on the cold floor for a long time. Nadia, my daughter, is also over there. Leisha, the only grandson I have left, and he's good for nothing. He'll never come here. He doesn't need us." The house and the yard were in very poor condition, all abandoned, with no man's hand touching them for so many years. What a fate, a friend, Jesus, Easter, it's almost here. I must go to the cemetery today, clean the graves because it's not good to leave the family uncared for. I'm going to look for some paint in the barn. I think I had some blue. And you, eat, dear, while the soup is still warm. She had heated it especially for her. Valentina Semyonovna found everything she needed, got ready, and went to the cemetery to put the graves of her loved ones in order. Her husband and daughter were buried near each other, although they had died in different years. Yes, it was a day of work. I have to rake the fallen leaves, sweep everything well, paint the fences, because the paint had completely faded away over the past 2 years. Looking at the photo of her dear daughter, the woman couldn't help but cry again, wiping her tears with the edge of her cotton handkerchief. It had been 7 years already, and the wound in her heart had still not fully healed. Valentina Semyonovna gazed at her daughter's features, the dimples in her cheeks, her beautiful brown eyes, her warm and open smile, and the memories came rushing back as if it all had happened just yesterday. Then she turned her gaze to the photo of Vasya. It was old, but he looked at her the same way he did in life, serious, but with that tenderness of his. My dear ones, how much I miss you. How my heart aches. I wish I could hug you now, Nadia, and stroke your thick, soft hair. How I long for one of those heart-to-heart talks, just like we used to have. But you are no longer here. That bastard took my daughter's life. The old woman began to clean the graves with a strange energy, as if in some way it could alleviate the anguish that kept resurfacing as she thought about her own life. Valia married like all the girls in the village. The neighbor's son, Baza, who had returned from the city, fell in love with me. She had a long blonde braid and a slim figure. The girl was very shy, quiet, and blushed with every compliment they gave her. The boy didn't think much about it, spoke with his family, and decided to marry. He did everything as it should be. Valia's mother was very happy. Baza was a boy from a good family, didn't drink, and married her daughter. But no one asked Valia if she really wanted to marry him or not. The poor bride didn't know what to do, was worried, and cried in secret. She didn't know him well, didn't know what to expect from her future husband. They had only seen each other a couple of times at dances, and she didn't think he was that handsome. He was shorter than her, with big hands like shovels and a round nose that looked like a potato. At first, life wasn't easy. Living with her husband's parents was complicated. They always told her what to do and scolded her sister. Valia didn't dare contradict them, only listened, but it irritated her greatly. Her husband, seeing what was going on, understood the situation. He pitied his wife and decided that something had to change. It wasn't fair. When parents get too involved in the newlyweds' lives, there's no space for them. So, after getting the materials and the land from the village council, Vasily built their own house, and Valia helped him in every way she could. She carried the bricks, wanting to get as far away as possible from her mother-in-law. Although they didn't move immediately, Valia began to see all of her husband's virtues, and she truly and forever fell in love with him. Baza turned out to be a very neat, frugal man. He had hands of gold. He built the bathhouse, the outhouse, the gazebo, and he did everything with great care and dedication. Esvieta didn't laugh at him. She simply took his hand and said, "Don't worry, I'll teach you. First, step in slowly, up to your waist. Then, hold on to me and move your arms like this." Artem looked at her, admiring her slender figure and her sincere smile. The sun shone on her wet skin, and Esvieta's blue eyes sparkled. Little by little, Artem began learning how to swim. Esvieta was so happy to see him relax. Finally, she got close to him and wanted to kiss him on the cheek, but unexpectedly, he embraced her and kissed her on the lips with passion. It was a tender kiss, but full of emotion. Surprised, Esvieta responded to the kiss. When they pulled apart, Artem, in a soft voice, said, "Esvieta, since I first saw you, I fell in love with you. I know I'm not the best match. I'm not a good boyfriend, but I would love to change my life. I want to leave everything bad behind and start over. Maybe here, in the countryside. I want to be by your side, live together, like a family. I don't know if you want the same, but if not, I'll understand. I don't want to be a burden to you." Esvieta, with her heart pounding, moved closer to him and said, while feeling a wave of happiness inside her, "I've dreamed of this too, really. That's why I'm not leaving here. This is my place, where I feel at peace. After a day of work, coming to this place calms me down. And yes, I like you a lot too." They both smiled, knowing that this was just the beginning of a new life together, full of hope. We all make mistakes. That's something that can happen to anyone. No one is perfect. The most important thing is to learn from those mistakes and move forward. The Lord is merciful. He forgives our faults. Artem repented sincerely, and over time, he didn't repeat the same mistakes. From that moment on, a new stage began in his life. Artem and Esvieta dove into the water, embraced, had fun together, and swam in the refreshing water that revitalized them. It was a beginning full of laughter and complicity. From that day on, their relationship blossomed, full of passion and love. Not long after, they signed their papers at the town hall and became husband and wife. They decided to live in Valentina's house since there was plenty of space, and the yard was large. Artem had an idea for a project he wanted to pursue, so over time, he began putting his plan into action. He decided to rebuild the barn and start raising rabbits. It was a business that required little investment, and although the neighbors mocked him at first, he didn't pay attention. Who was going to get rich raising rabbits? The comments didn't matter to him. He pressed on. He started attending exhibitions, buying special rabbit breeds, and began breeding high-value offspring. As time passed, his rabbits stood out, and he started taking them to exhibitions. The business grew, farms began buying his offspring, and his reputation expanded. At the same time, Artem became interested in beekeeping, something he had loved since childhood. He dedicated himself to it with such passion that in 3 years, he had over 100 hives that he took to the field. The honey he produced was highly valued, as were the herbs he cultivated. People started coming specifically for propolis and royal jelly, products highly prized in both medicine and cosmetics. Now, no one laughed at him. Artem, the ex-convict, had completely changed. He had earned the respect of everyone in the village. He had a beautiful house, a happy family, and his wife, Esvieta, was the most beautiful woman. Together, they had a daughter, Aloya, who was just as adorable and chubby as her mother. Valentina, for her part, was very happy to see how Artem and Esvieta had formed such a lovely family. She enjoyed taking care of her granddaughter and couldn't help but feel lucky. She thought about how blessed she was that Artem had come into her life. She remembered how, in the past, her grandson had begged her not to throw him out of the house, and how good it was that she hadn't, because he turned out to be a man of gold, so different from Lisha. Ah, Lisha. Despite everything that had happened, Valentina couldn't stop thinking about her. Lisha was still in prison, and although she wrote letters to her grandmother, it seemed that she couldn't understand that prison was now her life. Meanwhile, outside the bars, she couldn't resist the temptation to return to her bad decisions. Valentina calmly went to the notary and wrote her will. She decided that after her death, the house would be left in Artem's hands. It wasn't an easy decision, but she trusted him. She knew he wasn't the type of man who would waste what he had. Despite all the good Artem had achieved, Valentina didn't forget what he had done in the past. What he did to Leah. "Mum, you were right about everything. Max is a creep, a bastard. He left me, and it turns out his parents have been rich for a long time. He was just looking for a girlfriend, and the bastard was dating me and another one at the same time. When he found out I was pregnant, he told me he didn't know whose baby it was and then disappeared. It turns out that a simple village nurse is no match for him. Mom, I'm so scared. I should have an abortion. It's too soon. Who's going to need me alone with a baby?" Valentina's heart clenched. She struggled to breathe and tried to calm herself to speak. She took a deep breath and said as calmly as she could, "Don't get upset and don't cry, dear. Come here, we'll talk quietly. Your father and I won't scold you. I will help you. Don't abort. Please, don't ruin that baby's life and your health. I'm asking you. We can do it together. We are waiting for you." When the husband found out that his daughter was pregnant and that her fiancé had left her, he turned pale and clenched his fists. What an outrage. What a wretch. And Nadia is so good. She's a polite girl. I don't understand how this could have happened. Maybe I should have corrected her more when she was little, instead of spoiling her so much. And now what do I do? Do I have to shame my daughter in front of the whole town? Maybe I'd better find that fiancé. I should tell a man that you don't do that. It's not like a man to get a girl pregnant and then run away. And if he doesn't, he surely won't pay child support or acknowledge the child. At that moment, Valentina burst into tears and in anger said to her husband, "Why are you doing this, Batya? Nadia is having a very hard time. You are exaggerating. Don't you dare talk to her like that. Shout all you want, but don't accuse her of anything. Our daughter fell in love, and she couldn't help it. She gave in to temptation, trusting her fiancé. She was already thinking of having an abortion. I'm going to beg her not to do that sin, because it hurts my soul. And don't go looking for that scoundrel. Don't get involved. God is the one who will judge him. All right. In the end, we'll raise our granddaughter. We'll get her through this. If this is what we got, so be it." He calmed down a bit and hugged his wife. "I'm sorry. I was just yelling from inside. What's the point of fighting after an argument? Let's let people talk, I know." Valentina simply shook her head, not judging him. She knew what it felt like when everyone keeps asking you what's wrong, and you're so broken inside that you just want to scream. Surprisingly, her dog, Suja, didn't show any anger towards the guest, even though she didn't particularly like strangers. She barked a little as if to mark her territory, and that was it. Valentina set the table and called the young man over, saying, "Come, Artem, dinner is ready. It's nothing special. I'm a single woman. So, as they say, you're welcome." The young man ate the wheat soup as if he hadn't eaten in days. Then he drank some tea and devoured the pancakes with great pleasure, complimenting everything on the table. Then, suddenly he said, "Valentina, would you like me to chop some firewood for you? I see you have a lot of it over there. At least I have something to thank you for this delicious meal. I don't remember the last time I ate so well." Valentina was surprised but accepted. "Of course, I'll be happy to have your help," she told him. "I can't keep up, and my neighbor Grisha doesn't have the time either." The young man agreed, but Valentina began to notice something wasn't quite right. He was coughing a lot, sweating, looking very pale, and having difficulty breathing. Valentina looked at him with concern. "Artem, are you sick? Do you have a fever? Let me feel your forehead. Oh my God, you're burning up. Go lie down in the hallway. I'll call my neighbor Esvieta. She's a good girl and works as a paramedic. Let her check you out. And here I am, silly enough to let you chop firewood while you're sick." Valentina ran off and began searching for Esvieta. "Esvieta, dear, help me. I've invited a young man for dinner, and it seems he's sick. He's burning up and coughing a lot. Please take a look at him. You're an expert in these things." Esvieta didn't waste a second. She grabbed her medical kit and rushed to help. After examining Artem for a while, she frowned and said, "It looks like he has severe bronchitis. He'll need antibiotics and vitamins, and we need to bring the fever down immediately. Otherwise, this could turn into pneumonia. He needs to go to the hospital. I'll make sure they admit him, I promise." Artem protested, clearly worried. "No, I don't want to go to the hospital. I just got out of there, and I don't have money for treatment. If I go, they'll start asking questions. I don't want that. I'd rather leave. Thank you for everything." And just as he was saying that, he had another violent coughing fit. Valentina stood there with her mouth open, staring at the young man who was on the verge of collapsing. "Where are you going, my son? Stay here. I'll go to the pharmacy and get some medicine. And Esvieta is going to inject you and take care of you. Right, Esvieta?" The young woman smiled. "When have I ever denied you something, Valentina? You're like a mother to me. Don't worry. They won't let a man die just because he doesn't have money, right? We'll take care of him, you'll see." Then Esvieta told Artem, "Take off your clothes while I rub you down and make a compress for you. Don't worry, it's nothing serious. I'm almost like a doctor." The young man blushed, not knowing what to do. He couldn't take his eyes off Esvieta, who was looking at him with incredible kindness. He was pale, unable to say a word, while she, as if nothing were out of the ordinary, began to treat him with firm yet gentle hands. Artem couldn't help but thank Valentina and Esvieta for everything they were doing for him. 2 weeks later, he was already feeling much better. The cough had nearly disappeared, and he stayed living with Valentina, helping her with whatever he could. The woman let him repair the old latrine, and he was so grateful not to have to pay and to be able to live there that he put in great effort to work and help as much as possible. Artem also repaired the boiler for the bathhouse, and now he made sure it was heated regularly. Everyone enjoyed the steam, which they all loved. On the outside, the young man no longer looked as gaunt. Valentina cut his hair, washed and mended his clothes, and he started to look like a decent young man. Esvieta, who frequently passed by the house, visited, they had tea and talked about various things. There was an attraction between them, hanging in the air, as if they liked each other, but for now they were only good friends, nothing more. The girl helped him settle in better, bringing him nice striped curtains and a tablecloth to make his home cozier. Valentina was happy to have Artem in her house. She no longer felt as lonely or sad because, after all, there was now someone living with her. Moreover, Artem was a modest, kind, and quiet boy. He didn't like talking about his past, and Valentina didn't insist. However, the neighbors didn't take long to start gossiping. They said that Valentina, at her age, was a bit out of her mind. Her own grandson was in prison, and now she had taken in another delinquent into her home. The rumors quickly spread. They said, "Look, now she's with the last penny. What could she be thinking? Now there's another mouth to feed in her house. What will she do with this young man? Is he going to rob her or kill her? What does she think she's doing with him? The people around her, having no idea of the situation, were already making assumptions. Despite all this, Elżbieta was the only one who truly understood Valentina and always supported her, while the neighbors kept mocking her and criticizing her behind her back. She had a small house that she had inherited from distant relatives and worked as a nurse in the district center. No one understood why she took so much time to help Semyonovna without receiving anything in return. She wrote letters to the blind woman's grandson, who was in jail, and also ran to the post office to collect her pension. After each shift, she used to go to Valentina as if she had nothing better to do. Others, at her age, would enjoy life in the city, but she, being a prominent woman, was stuck in the countryside, spending time with an old man and a troublesome man. Elżbieta had grown up in an orphanage and still dreamed of a family and a comfortable life, things she never had. That's why she approached Valentina, because she was a kind, warm and understanding woman who treated her like a daughter. She listened to her, gave her advice, and of course Artem liked Elżbieta very much. However, the young woman did not dare to acknowledge her feelings. She kept them well hidden inside. She kept saying to herself, "Cut the crap. He's a criminal, a tramp. What kind of boyfriend would he be?" And besides, he was so quiet, he wouldn't tell her anything about his past. He just sighed and avoided looking at her. But something in his eyes said he was a good man, because eyes never lie, she thought. And so 6 months passed, without either of them noticing the change happening around them. Artem completely transformed Valentina's yard. He fixed the porch, the outhouse, cleaned the chimney, raised rabbits, and mowed the grass to prepare for winter. Valentina loved him so much that she considered him almost a grandson. One day, Suja the dog began to bark and tear off his leash. Leia, Valentina's grandson, had arrived. The woman was frightened, raised her arms to hug him, but when she saw him, she did not recognize him. Leia, who was skinny with tattoos and a cold look, reluctantly gave him a hug. "Hello, Grandma. Weren't you going on vacation?" he said gruffly. "Give me something to eat. I'm hungry." I decided to go back home to rest a little, and that one by the porch. Valentina introduced him. "This is Artem, the lodger. He lives here in the little house and gives me a hand with the house, because you know, at my age, it's hard for me. Artem, this is my grandson, Alexei. Meet him." But Leia didn't even shake hands, just gave Artem a withering look and turned away without a word. He muttered between his teeth, "The last thing I need is all these people watching me. What is this fad of bringing all kinds of people home?" From that day on, Valentina's life changed. Leia did nothing but drink, didn't want to do anything, and didn't seem interested in looking for work either. Artem tried to avoid him, but Leia soon began to notice Elżbieta. A blonde, shapely, blue-eyed, lonely. What he didn't see in the others, he saw in her. So one night, after he had had too much to drink, he went over to the girl's house who was doing the laundry in the summer kitchen. When Elżbieta saw him half drunk and upset, she was very frightened. Leia looked at her with a cynical smile and began to talk to her in a cheeky way. "You are beautiful, Elżbieta. I like you. You're like blood and milk. I could devour you. How about we go out? Let's have a drink. It's been a while since I've had a woman, and now there's such a beautiful one around." Elżbieta, furious, grabbed a cast-iron frying pan that was on the table and shouted at him, "Get out of my house! Don't you dare come back here! I'll report you to the police. Tell whoever you want, but I don't want to see you anymore." Leia, undeterred, replied, "That's clear. I don't care about your threats. I'm leaving, but I want you to know that my grandmother is sick. She's going to die soon, and the house will be mine, and your little house too." When she left, Elżbieta stayed in her chair, trembling with tension, and could not help but shed a few tears. She compared Leia, the braggart, with Artem, the quiet one, and thought to herself that, in spite of everything, Artem did not look like a delinquent like Leah. From that moment on, Elżbieta began to keep an eye on Leah. She realized that he was in the house for something else, that something was wrong. One day, while pulling weeds in the vegetable garden, he heard Leah talking on the phone in the backyard. The girl sneaked over, crouched down, and listened to the conversation. Leah was talking to someone, almost shouting, "Yes, I know I have taken the bail. As always, I keep my promises. I will take care of my grandmother shortly. She has no family but me, so the house will be mine. And the plot of land too. I can do what I want with it. I don't need it. I'll have it ready for this weekend. I just have to get the poison. It's not easy, but I'll get it." Elżbieta, with a frozen heart, waited a bit and then ran to Valentina. He called her at home, pretending he wanted to check on her. Once in the courtyard, he whispered to her, "Listen, they came to see you recently. They wanted to buy your house. Remember this, it's with Baccia. We had time to work together, side by side, and now everything is covered in weeds. The truth is, I don't want to continue like this. How am I going to sell the house? Where will I go? To the city? What am I supposed to do at my age? I was born here, I grew up here, and I want to stay here until the end. What happened?" Elżbieta was trembling with fear and began telling Valentina, "What happened is that, by chance, I overheard your grandson talking on the phone with someone. He was saying that he had already gotten a deposit and that he was going to kick you out of the house in a few weeks and then sell it. Do you realize that you're in danger? What are you going to do now?" The elderly woman didn't believe for a moment what her neighbor was telling her and waved her hands dismissively as if it wasn't important. "What are you talking about? Maybe you're mistaken, I don't believe it. Lisha is not like that. He's been a naughty boy since he was little, but he would never do something so bad. I don't even want to think about it." "Well, come on. Can you help me? Tell me, should I take my pills today or not?" But it was Elżbieta who was very worried. So she met with Artem, her neighbor, and decided to consult him. He listened to her very attentively and became very concerned. "It's no joke, I assure you. I've noticed something strange too. Lisha has been hanging around the house looking at everything, as if he's getting ready for something. He really would be capable of hurting his own grandmother. Don't let it happen. I'll keep an eye on him, I promise." A couple of days later, Lisha told his grandmother that he was going to work the next day, but that he wanted to have a farewell party. He bought 3 large bags. He was being incredibly affectionate and friendly. "Don't worry about me, Grandma. Don't make a scene. I've got everything ready to take with me so I don't have to start cooking. Let's have a drink, let's have a snack, sit quietly, just like before, you know. And in the meantime, we can plan my future. Don't call me. Don't let anyone bother you. Just the 2 of us, like always. I've been distant from you, and that's not right." Valentina was very surprised and answered him, "Oh my God. I'll go down to the cellar to get some sauerkraut. I'll bring it up, and if you want, I can call Artem to come to the table. It's a little strange, I know, but we live in the same yard, and I'm very happy that you've found a job. Recently, Leah had been worrying me." In fact, that same afternoon, our protagonist hid behind the barn and began peeking through a crack to see what her grandson was doing. Something in his behavior didn't add up. Leah had never shown her so much affection before, and spending an entire afternoon alone with her was very strange. Something is wrong, thought Valentina. She saw how her grandson slipped out the back door of the house. In recent days, she had seen him using a jar with white powder, which he was sprinkling generously on the food. As he did this, he looked around carefully, making sure no one saw him. At that moment, Valentina began to realize that Elżbieta was right. Tears began to fall down her wrinkled cheeks, and she thought, "If even my own grandson doesn't need me, then what's the point of staying here?" With these thoughts in mind, she put some cabbage into a bowl, called Artem to come to the table, and sat down, as if nothing was happening. "I'll bring it," she said, "and if necessary, I'll call Artem to sit with us at the table. Though honestly, it's a bit uncomfortable. We live in the same yard, so it's not too strange, but still, sometimes it embarrasses me. I'm really glad you found a job. It's a good change for you. Lately, Lesha has been really worrying me." In fact, she was so uneasy that our protagonist hid behind the barn again to spy on her grandson, peeking through a crack to see what he was doing. Lesha's behavior was so strange that it struck her as odd. He had never been this affectionate with her before, and now, suddenly, he wanted to spend the whole afternoon alone with her. Something's wrong here, she thought. Valentina watched as her grandson slipped out the back door. Recently, she had seen him using a jar of white powder, and he was sprinkling it generously on his food as though it was something normal. While doing this, he looked around the kitchen, making sure no one saw him, as if he were watching to ensure that no one entered. At that moment, the elderly woman understood immediately that Esvieta had been right. Tears started falling down her wrinkled cheeks, and she thought to herself, "Well, if my own grandson doesn't need me, why should I keep living here?" With all that in her head, she put some cabbage in a bowl, called Artem to come to the table, and sat down as if nothing was happening, trying to hide her pain. Artem entered the house, greeted Lesha, and sat down at the table as well. Lesha, very calmly, poured wine into shot glasses and said, "There are no more dishes, so don't send them away. Come on, we'll drink until I leave, for my new job and my new life." The grandson pushed his plate with slices of meat and told his grandmother, "Eat already, Grandma, or it will just end up being cabbage soup. And you, Artem, help yourself." The woman pulled herself together and took a bite, mentally preparing herself for the worst. Suddenly, Artem snatched the sausage from her hands and shouted, "Don't eat anything! He poisoned everything! You bastard! How could you? It's your own grandmother. You don't feel sorry for her." He immediately took a knife out of his pocket and went after Artem. "You've been spying on me, haven't you? What do you care? Why are you so nosy, poking your nose into other people's business? I'm going to teach you a lesson." Valentina cried out in fright. "Oh, Leia, you can't do this to me. What are you doing? You are possessed by a demon. Why are you so mean and cruel? What have I done to you? Tell me." The young man smiled and began to shout, "I need the money, you know. Did they offer you to sell the house?" "But no, you refused, and I accepted." "What do you need a house like that for? 50 acres of land. I've already taken the deposit, so there's no turning back. And if it wasn't for that bastard, I would have got it. Let go, all because of you." "Who invited you?" Artem also shouted. "Don't you dare touch Valentina. I won't let them hurt her." Valentina, terrified, ran off to the house of the neighborhood policeman, who lived only 2 houses away. She returned as fast as she could with his help, but by the time they arrived, it was too late. Artem was bleeding, clutching his side where the knife had stuck. Meanwhile, Ilesha was so nervous that she started packing her things non-stop. She even stole her grandmother's purse. At that moment, they caught the wretch and took him away. Artem was taken by ambulance to the hospital, but Valentina, shattered, sat on the edge of the chair, her face covered by her hands, crying inconsolably. How could all this happen? She thought, her heart breaking. Why did I have to live through something like this? I had enough in my old age. My own grandson tried to poison me. And the worst thing, why did he do it? I loved him. I gave him my best, everything I could. What's going to happen to Artem now? She felt guilty, but also relieved at what Artem had done. He's not to blame for anything. He wasn't afraid of anything. He stood up for me. He didn't let them kill me. He's a real man, not like Lecha, she thought, her heart a little calmer as she remembered Artem's bravery. Soon after, Esvieta came running in, worried after hearing from the neighbors what had happened. She approached Valentina to comfort her. "Calm down, Valentina, don't cry, please. It breaks my heart to see you like this. It's all over now. We'll see how Artem is tomorrow. His wound is not serious, it's superficial. He will be discharged soon." Valentina, although still trembling, felt a little better when she heard those words. "I called Artem, talked to him, and told him I won't leave you alone. Sometimes people are born that way. Elisha is hopeless, but you are not alone. I am here with you. I need you, and so does Artem. In time, everything will work out, and all this will be behind us." "Come on, let's have some tea, shall we?" said Esvieta, trying to calm her down. "With some raspberry jam, to make you feel better." Valentina hugged her, tears in her eyes, but a small comfort in her heart. "Thank you, Esvieta. Thank you for being here. You're no stranger to me either. You're the only one who really understands me. Don't leave me alone in this. You have such a beautiful heart. Come on, my dear. I'll make you some mint tea, just the way you like it." Valentina was called into his office by an investigator, a rough man named Karpov. He looked at her sternly, as if he were analyzing her, and began an awkward conversation. "Good afternoon, madam. I have called you about this matter. Your grandson, who has been gone so long, is going to jail for trying to kill that tramp. In addition to other things that have come to light, you will have to sign a statement saying that Alexei wanted to poison you, or if you prefer, deny it." Valentina wiped away a tear that rolled down her cheek and shook her head. "No, Mr. Investigator, I won't. Let that be on your conscience. In the end, he's my own grandson, and I feel so bad for him. I still feel guilty for not taking better care of him, for not raising him, for not stopping him from doing bad things. I talked to Lisha, and he said he felt safer in jail, especially since the people he took the deposit from will be looking for him anyway. So be that way, but I don't want to add more time to his sentence. Thanks to Artem, maybe I would be on the other side of the world now." Karpov coughed and looked at her more carefully. "I wonder about you, Valentina. Do you even know who Artem is? This Pivovarov who took refuge in your house out of pity? It was he who, 7 years ago, ran over your daughter to death. He served his sentence and just got out. He has no idea who lives under his roof." The woman began to feel very sick, as if everything was spinning around. She tried to breathe but fainted. The investigator, alarmed by her reaction, did not expect her to be so strong. Quickly, he began to pour water on her and to move a handkerchief, opening the window to let air in. Slowly, Valentina came to her senses and asked for water. "Gee, I feel a little better," she said in a weak voice. "How was I supposed to know?" "Honey, I was in the hospital after my daughter's funeral. I was in bed for a month. I didn't go to the trial. Why should I? No one can give me my daughter back. And Artem told me that he had already served his sentence. He assured me he had nothing to do with my daughter's death, so I didn't ask many questions. My God, what's going on? Who can you trust? No one." She felt so sick to her stomach, as if something had hit her hard. She thought to herself, maybe the best thing would be to die now, with all this on top of me. Better than knowing I've spent so much time caring for a murderer and holding him as if he were my own son. She barely made it home. The yard was incredibly quiet, so used to the solitude by now. Suja, the little dog, was happily circling around her, but she didn't even pay attention to him and went into the house. "Thank you, Esbieta, for cleaning up while I was gone," she murmured feebly. He took Nadia's portrait in his hands, caressed it, and kissed her eyes and cheeks again. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I didn't know who she was." Sadness came over her strongly, like a weight that wouldn't let her breathe. "Otherwise, I wouldn't have let him into my house. It's so horrible to betray you, darling. That scoundrel will never set foot in my house again, I promise you." He seemed like a quiet, honest, good guy. And the bastard knew perfectly well what house he lived in, saw your picture, and didn't say a word. It's amazing how deceitful people can be. Valentina fell into a deep depression and started to get sick. Everything that had happened in the last few days left her completely exhausted. She no longer wanted to eat, or get up, or see anyone. Elżbieta did not understand anything. She thought Valentina was sad about her grandson and tried to give her good news. Well, he's fine. Artem will be discharged tomorrow and he's coming back. You won't be alone anymore. But Valentina didn't react. She covered her ears and burst into tears, full of bitterness and despair. Don't talk to me about him. I hate him. He's a murderer, do you understand? It was he who killed my daughter. And as much as he served his sentence, the investigator told me he will never set foot in my house again. Elżbieta was completely shocked. She didn't know what to say. He tried to comfort her and stroked her back. Then, indignant, she couldn't wait for the next bus and ran to the hospital. She was furious. I'm going to smash his face in. What a bastard of a guy. He enters the woman's house knowing the pain he has caused her, lives quietly and takes advantage of her ignorance and kindness. This has no name. Elżbieta burst into the room like a whirlwind and went straight for him. It's true. Tell me, look me in the eyes. You killed Valentina Semyonovna's daughter and lived quietly in her house, pretending to be a tramp. Why did you do it? Tell me. Artem sighed and stared at her. Yes and no. Yes, I was convicted of Nadia's murder and served 5 whole years. That's true, but I didn't do it. Do you understand me? It wasn't me behind the wheel. Elżbieta opened her eyes in surprise. What? What are you saying? You're lying again. Stop beating around the bush and tell the truth for once. Artem fidgeted and cleared his throat. I'm not lying. I was working as a chauffeur for a businessman. Kovrov seemed like a good family man, a patron of the arts, everything he wanted to show the world. But that night, I wasn't the one driving. He was the one behind the wheel, not me. He was afraid it would all come out, that his wife would discover his affairs with other women and the murder. So he decided that I should take the blame for everything. My story is a difficult one. I was an orphan. My Aunt Masha raised me, and she was very ill with cancer. She needed expensive treatment. Kovrov promised to help me. He said he would give me the money. And he did, in fact. He gave me the money for my aunt's treatment and for an apartment. I was so young and so naive that I accepted. I thought he would give me enough money to cure her, to have my own place. I had no idea what prison was like. I thought I would be there for a couple of years, but everything would be fine afterward. But it wasn't like that. They gave me 5 years in prison, and during the trial, they spat in my face, shouted, "Murderer," called me a bastard. They scolded me everywhere. My aunt found out what I had done, and in the end, she died without seeing her daughter cured, without seeing my life become stable. So I ended up on the street, a homeless man, an ex-convict, with the label of a murderer. I didn't go to the cemetery. I wanted to tell everything to Valentina, but I couldn't. I was too cowardly to face her. I couldn't even believe how stupid I was. I thought that maybe, with time, I could help her and earn her forgiveness, but I couldn't. I was too scared. Now I feel so bad. I feel like I can't keep carrying this weight, this lie. It's like a stone on my back. Elżbieta looked at him without knowing what to think. She didn't know what to say, but one thing was clear. Artem had to go and tell Valentina the truth, just as he was telling her now. You have to do it, Artem. You have to go and tell her everything, just as you're doing now with me. Do it for your soul. You can't keep living with this lie. Valentina is devastated, crying, thinking you're a murderer. She curses you and hates you. It's not fair, Artem. It's not. He nodded, his head bowed. You're right, Elżbieta. No more hiding, no more cowardice. I've made too many mistakes in my life. It doesn't matter whether she forgives me or not. What matters is that I tell the truth. I can't live with this anymore. It's like I can't breathe, like everything is crushing me. The next day, Artem was discharged from the hospital, gathered all his courage, and went to Semyonovna's house. Suya entered the house with a cheerful smile. She did it quietly, as usual, so as not to disturb anyone. The old woman had been like this for days, sitting with her back to the wall, not moving or reacting to anything. Artem coughed softly and, with a low voice, began to speak. "I didn't kill your daughter. I wasn't driving that night. My boss convinced me to take the blame. He promised me a fortune and that he would save my aunt from cancer. I, naive, accepted. I spent 5 years in prison for something I didn't do, and it was all a cruel lie. My aunt died while I was inside, never saw a single penny or the treatment that was promised. Now, I'm a homeless man, an ex-convict, and a murderer like everyone thinks. But I swear on the Bible, I wasn't the one driving that night." Valentina didn't say anything at first, but the sad look in Artem's eyes made her voice crack. "I wanted to tell you this at the cemetery that night, so my soul could be at peace. I can't live with this weight. I was scared, and I know you won't believe me, but I've said it, and it's done. Thank you for your kindness, for listening to me. I really appreciate it." Slowly, Valentina got up from the bed, and without taking her eyes off him, she said, "Kneel there, beneath the photo, and tell the truth. If you lie, God will punish you. There's no doubt about it." Artem, with a deep sigh, knelt and, with serenity, replied, "I didn't kill anyone, I swear to you. That day, I didn't run over your daughter." Valentina took a deep breath. "So it's all true. You're not lying. Now I believe you. But why did you do it? How foolish young people can be, right? You ruined your life, and now you carry a mark that won't be erased. And the one who really killed my daughter, where is he now?" Artem, looking down, lifted his head and said sadly, "You know him very well. His name is Alexander Kovrov, a well-known businessman who was a deputy and now lives happily, without consequences. Back then, I worked for him as his chauffeur, and that's all. What more can I say? I signed everything voluntarily. It's my fault. Now, all I can do is tell the truth. I've told you everything, and now, finally, I feel a little more at peace." Valentina stared at him for a long moment, and finally, she took his hand. "Don't go, son. Stay here. I've gotten so used to you, it hurts to think about what has happened. And it's still hard to believe you're not a murderer. I don't know, it's all so strange." Artem approached her with a sad smile. "You know, sometimes I don't understand how I could have been so wrong about someone. But let's live like before. I don't care what the people in the village say. Let them mind their own business. If I have to live like an outcast, so be it. I don't care anymore. Thank you for believing in me. I don't want to keep being a homeless man, much less. I don't want to crawl around begging for alms." Valentina, relieved, went to prepare dinner. Meanwhile, she thought about what Artem had said and was glad he wasn't involved in the murder. She watched as he moved around the house, despite still having some discomfort from his recent injury. He seemed to be struggling to adapt to the peaceful life in the countryside, but he was trying. As she washed the dishes, she couldn't help but think that she finally felt at peace. After they finished eating, they sat down to have some tea with jam. The atmosphere was so warm and relaxed that they both felt as if they had taken a huge burden off their shoulders. The conversation flowed easily, and for the first time in a long time, Valentina could breathe peacefully. Sveta, upon hearing that Artem and Valentina had reconciled and that he was going to stay with her again, was very happy. Every night, they now gathered together to drink tea, and Artem restored the house and played with the little girl. One day, when it was very hot, The young people were helping Valentina tie up the tomatoes in the garden. At one point, she suggested, "Esvieta, why don't you take Artem to the river? It's so hot. I'm sure he doesn't even know how beautiful it is there. I'm going to sleep for a while. I'm exhausted." Esvieta, delighted with the suggestion, took Artem by the hand and led him to the river. What a marvel! The landscape was spectacular. Forests in the distance, endless fields, and a sky blue without clouds. The girl, without thinking, took off her clothes, leaving only her swimsuit, and began splashing him with cool water. "Let's swim. The water is amazing. Let's swim to the other shore. There are beautiful lilies there. And even though they say there are mermaids, I've never believed them, to be honest." Artem, a bit unsure, admitted, "I don't know how to swim. When I was a kid, some boys pushed me into the river and I almost drowned. Since then, I've been afraid of water." Esvieta didn't laugh at him. She simply took his hand and said, "Don't worry, I'll teach you. First, step in slowly, up to your waist. Then, hold on to me and move your arms like this." Artem looked at her, admiring her slender figure and her sincere smile. The sun shone on her wet skin, and Esvieta's blue eyes sparkled. Little by little, Artem began learning how to swim. Esvieta was so happy to see him relax. Finally, she got close to him and wanted to kiss him on the cheek, but unexpectedly, he embraced her and kissed her on the lips with passion. It was a tender kiss, but full of emotion. Surprised, Esvieta responded to the kiss. When they pulled apart, Artem, in a soft voice, said, "Esvieta, since I first saw you, I fell in love with you. I know I'm not the best match. I'm not a good boyfriend, but I would love to change my life. I want to leave everything bad behind and start over, maybe here, in the countryside. I want to be by your side, live together, like a family. I don't know if you want the same, but if not, I'll understand. I don't want to be a burden to you." Esvieta, with her heart pounding, moved closer to him and said, while feeling a wave of happiness inside her, "I've dreamed of this too, really. That's why I'm not leaving here. This is my place, where I feel at peace. After a day of work, coming to this place calms me down. And yes, I like you a lot too." They both smiled, knowing that this was just the beginning of a new life together, full of hope. We all make mistakes. That's something that can happen to anyone. No one is perfect. The most important thing is to learn from those mistakes and move forward. The Lord is merciful. He forgives our faults. Artem repented sincerely, and over time, he didn't repeat the same mistakes. From that moment on, a new stage began in his life. Artem and Esvieta dove into the water, embraced, had fun together, and swam in the refreshing water that revitalized them. It was a beginning full of laughter and complicity. From that day on, their relationship blossomed, full of passion and love. Not long after, they signed their papers at the town hall and became husband and wife. They decided to live in Valentina's house since there was plenty of space, and the yard was large. Artem had an idea for a project he wanted to pursue, so over time, he began putting his plan into action. He decided to rebuild the barn and start raising rabbits. It was a business that required little investment, and although the neighbors mocked him at first, he didn't pay attention. Who was going to get rich raising rabbits? The comments didn't matter to him. He pressed on. He started attending exhibitions, buying special rabbit breeds, and began breeding high-value offspring. As time passed, his rabbits stood out, and he started taking them to exhibitions. The business grew, farms began buying his offspring, and his reputation expanded. At the same time, Artem became interested in beekeeping, something he had loved since childhood. He dedicated himself to it with such passion that in 3 years, he had over 100 hives that he took to the field. The honey he produced was highly valued, as were the herbs he cultivated. People started coming specifically for propolis and royal jelly, products highly prized in both medicine and cosmetics. Now, no one laughed at him. Artem, the ex-convict, had completely changed. He had earned the respect of everyone in the village. He had a beautiful house, a happy family, and his wife, Elżbieta, was the most beautiful woman. Together, they had a daughter, a lawyer, who was just as adorable and chubby as her mother. Valentina, for her part, was very happy to see how Artem and Elżbieta had formed such a lovely family. She enjoyed taking care of her granddaughter and couldn't help but feel lucky. She thought about how blessed she was that Artem had come into her life. She remembered how, in the past, her grandson had begged her not to throw him out of the house, and how good it was that she hadn't, because he turned out to be a man of gold, so different from Lisha. Ah, Lisha. Despite everything that had happened, Valentina couldn't stop thinking about her. Lisha was still in prison, and although she wrote letters to her grandmother, it seemed that she couldn't understand that prison was now her life. Meanwhile, outside the bars, she couldn't resist the temptation to return to her bad decisions. Valentina calmly went to the notary and wrote her will. She decided that after her death, the house would be left in Artem's hands. It wasn't an easy decision, but she trusted him. She knew he wasn't the type of man who would waste what he had. Despite all the good Artem had achieved, Valentina didn't forget what he had done in the past, what he did to Leah, trying to poison her. However, she couldn't change what her grandson had done. She believed that destiny had already taken care of bringing justice, and time was proving it. The famous Alexander Kovrov, the businessman and former deputy who had often believed he was above others, suffered a terrible accident. He was drunk while driving and ended up in a wheelchair, unable to move for the rest of his life. His business collapsed, and his competitors wasted no time in taking over what he had built. His political career also crumbled. His wife, upon learning of his many infidelities and despicable behavior, asked for a divorce. She demanded half of his assets and also sent Kovrov to a facility for the disabled. Artem, one of the buyers who came from the capital, told her all this, and he was so surprised that he decided to share it with Valentina. She, hearing the story, simply shook her head. "My prayers reached the Lord," she said calmly. "The judgment is complete. It's God's judgment. Everyone gets what they deserve according to their deeds. It's not for nothing that it's said, 'He who digs a pit for others will fall into it.' Now it's his turn to feel what it's like for everyone to turn their back on you and leave you alone." In time, Elżbieta became pregnant again. She laughed and said to Artem, "Enough already, Artem. You're not going to make me go on maternity leave again. When are we going to expect the third one?" Artem, hugging her lovingly, whispered, "I promise. 3 children and everything. I've always dreamed of having a big family, a wife who loves me, and babies that I've waited so long for. Thank you, my love, for believing in me when you took the risk and gave me your life. It was the love and kindness of Valentina that made me change. If it weren't for you, where would I be now? Maybe in prison, or starving, or dead, lying in some corner." Elżbieta felt so happy hearing those words, and she replied tenderly, "I'm very lucky. I have the best husband in the world, the best father, and the best man. And it's all thanks to you, my love. I love you so much, and I'll always be by your side, no matter what." Over time, the people in the village forgot that Artem had been in prison. Now he was a respected man, a farmer and beekeeper who had managed to change his life. Everyone understood that in reality, anyone could start over. You just need a sincere desire and people to support you on the journey.